Luffy and every other pirate in One Piece always talks about becoming the Pirate King, but even though it is the literal goal of the main character, Pirate King is actually not the biggest title in this story. In the latest chapter, Loki reveals that his goal is even more ambitious than Luffy's, where Loki doesn't just want to be the king of the giants or the king of the pirates, but the king of the world. Where things get really interesting though, is that Loki didn't come up with this dream on his own. The man who gave Loki his dream was none other than Rox the Xebec, and Loki is hardly the only character Xebec set on this path. There are at least 4 other confirmed pirates in the series who inherited Xebec's ambition, many of whom are some of the most important characters in the whole story. I will reveal to you who all these characters are, but I will also talk about the mystery of where Xebec himself got his dream from, where I genuinely believe that the man who originally inspired Xebec was in fact Joy Boy. The first character to ever mention the idea of conquering the world in One Piece is Blackbeard, and this was all the way back in the pre-time skip right before his fight with Ace. Blackbeard revealed his plan of world domination to Ace in an attempt to make Ace join him, which Ace bluntly refused. To this day, this scene is the biggest hint we've ever gotten of Blackbeard's true motivations in the series. While he clearly wants the One Piece and to become the Pirate King, these are likely just a means to an end for him, and Teach's ultimate goal has from the start been to rule the world. Teach is also likely one of the characters who inherited this goal from Rox the Xebec. Blackbeard is clearly very fascinated by him, where he has named his flagship the Saber of Xebec, and has set his home base on Pirate Island, the place where the Rox pirates were originally founded decades ago. It's also likely no surprise that Blackbeard specifically wanted to join the Whitebeard pirates when he was young, as Whitebeard himself was one of the surviving members of Xebec's pirate crew. There could have however been something else that made Teach specifically choose to go under Whitebeard. On paper, there was really nothing stopping Blackbeard from joining any of the other former Rox pirates like Kaido, Big Mom or Shiki's crews instead. Blackbeard says that what he was doing under Whitebeard for all those years was looking for the Yami Yami no Mi, but I genuinely think this is something he could have done under any other emperor. So, why did Teach choose Whitebeard? There is actually one thing that made Whitebeard different from any of the other former Rox pirates who created their own crews, and this was the fact that Whitebeard did not seek world domination. If you're wondering who those other characters whom Xebec inspired to conquer the world are, they are in fact Kaido, Big Mom and Shiki. All 3 literally have scenes in the story where they reveal that they each inherited Xebec's dream of world conquest. Shiki revealed it to Roger when they fought and he tried to recruit him, while Kaido and Big Mom declared that the purpose of their alliance was to conquer the world, and to kill each other after the job was done. Looking at this from Blackbeard's perspective, it makes perfect sense that he chose to go with Whitebeard, where the other former Rox pirates were literally rivals in the way of Blackbeard's own dream. Let's however take a moment to soak this all in. Xebec not only inspired Loki, he also inspired 4 Emperor caliber pirates to try to take over the world. Yet even though these are some of the strongest characters in all of One Piece, none of them actually got as close to achieving this dream as Xebec himself. The Rox pirates are to date by far the strongest pirate crew we've ever heard about in One Piece. This isn't hyperbole, and Sengoku says this word for word in the chapter where they are introduced, but also, he further builds up how special this crew was, by saying that the Rox pirates were more of a terrorist group than just a gang of criminals. Sengoku also drops a very mysterious line of dialogue in this scene, where he says that Xebec broke many of the world's taboos, and I think this has big implications of where Xebec himself got his idea of world conquest. It's not really a stretch to say that this line means that Xebec studied the Void Century. The clue in the story that backs this up is that both Kaido and Big Mom somehow know many of the world's big secrets, but even further, they were literally gathering poneglyphs even before Roger reached Laugh Tale. If I am to add 2 and 2 together, this is likely knowledge they gained from Xebec. An interesting detail to also bring up here is that Kaido literally knew about Joy Boy. Even though this might surprise some of you, you do not need to go to Laugh Tale to actually find out about Joy Boy. We've seen this through both Vegapunk and Robin, where information about Joy Boy can be read in many of the regular poneglyphs. Now, If Kaido knew about Joy Boy, I think it also very likely means that Xebec knew as well, and that Xebec was the one who originally shared this information with Kaido. But more importantly, I think this is the very thing that made Xebec decide to become the king of the world in the first place. Just like a lot of characters who studied the poneglyphs, Xebec likely learned of the great war between Joy Boy and Imu that tore the world apart during the Void Century. This is how Rocksteady Xebec could have also learned the truth behind his own lineage. The D-Clan are all said to be descendants of Imu's past enemies, and there is apparently something very special about the Will of D and its connection with the Void Century. This is hinted by both Vegapunk and Emmet, and Vegapunk knowing this also confirms that you can learn the D-Clan's secret even without going to Laugh Tale, which would also mean that what Vegapunk learned could be something Xebec himself discovered years ago. However, the source I'm truly interested in is actually Emmet. This is because Emmet, who is a former companion of Joy Boy's, brings up an extremely interesting detail about him, which is that he had wanted to make Joy Boy king. I believe that what Emmet is talking about here is that, perhaps shockingly, it was Joy Boy's goal to be the king of the world. Here is my theory to tie this all together. Xebec decades ago discovered not only the truth of the Void Century and the Great War, and that his ancestors fought on Joy Boy's side, but more importantly, I think Xebec also discovered the world government's greatest secret. One of the weirdest things surrounding Xebec is that only a few decades after his death, Xebec has seemingly been completely erased from history. But this is actually a far bigger deal than you might first think. When they were active, the Rocks Pirates were a world-renowned pirate crew, which means that removing someone like Xebec from all records would have been a huge undertaking. Just as an example, even though they would want to, the government has never managed to erase Roger and his crew from history, even though it has been over 20 years since Roger's death. And this is likely simply due to how notorious the Roger Pirates were, where it is said that every living soul had heard Roger's name. Based on his reputation, Xebec was likely only a few steps away from Roger when it came to world renown, yet somehow, the government has succeeded in making the world forget about him completely. They also seemingly did this through sheer brute force, where they possibly even sank entire islands to hide the truth. The only other time we've heard of something like this in the story was at the very beginning of the final saga, when the government destroyed an entire country to eliminate Sabo after he had discovered Imu's existence. I think it's very possible that the reason why Xebec was completely wiped from history was that he too had learned that the Imu from the Void Century was still alive and ruling the world government. It to me is simply extremely telling that with all these connections between Xebec and the Void Century, his goal was to specifically become the king of the world, which should be just an old wives' tale to most people of the One Piece world, as in their eyes, there has never even been such a figure. It is possible that Joy Boy himself in the past had fought Imu over who would become the king of the world, and that this is what Emmet was referring to when he said that he wanted to make Joy Boy king. Even though a lot of you may see Joy Boy as a figure like Roger and Luffy, where he wouldn't want to rule anything, I think it's possible that he was in fact a very different kind of character. Joy Boy may have ironically been a lot more serious of a figure than these two, where he wasn't just a pirate, but also the literal leader of the Ancient Kingdoms faction in the Void Century War. I'm also very confident that Emmet didn't mean that he wanted to make Joy Boy Pirate King, where Luffy literally tells him that this is his dream, yet Emmet has no reaction to this. Even after he'd gone to Laugh Tale and learned everything about Joy Boy's life, Roger also acted like he'd never heard of the Pirate King title before it was given to him. What I think is likely is that Joy Boy himself may not have been interested in power, but that it was instead his followers like Emmet who wanted him to become the king of the world. This would seemingly be consistent with what little we know of Joy Boy's character, where he was very loyal to his friends, and was responsible enough to lead an entire war effort. If Xebec studied the ancient history and learned of both Joy Boy and Imu, as well as the Great War, this could basically explain everything about him. Since he was a member of the D-Clan, Xebec likely wanted to emulate his ancestors who fought against the future celestial dragons. If we look at the Rocks Pirates, They could also be seen as a sort of a bastardized version of Nika's alliance, which we've seen on the Elbaf mural, where just like the forces surrounding Nika, Xebec's crew were a massive hodgepodge of extremely different individuals, races and creatures. Naturally though, the Rocks pirates weren't exactly cooperating with each other, and many of them were simply looking for a moment to betray Xebec. Even if Xebec had been following in Joy Boy's footsteps and wanted to defeat Imu, this does not make Xebec himself a good guy. Even though a lot of what we hear about Xebec is second-hand information, the story makes it clear that he was still a villain, where he, for example, during the God Valley incident let monsters like Kaido and Big Mom free to do whatever they wanted on an island full of innocent bystanders. And in the latest chapter, we find out that Xebec personally beat Kid Loki into a bloody mess for no real reason. Loki idolizing Rocksteady Xebec is definitely not something I expected to happen, and I wonder if it actually has a greater purpose in the story, where maybe it is possible setup for Loki in the future joining up with Blackbeard, since he really is the closest thing there is to a second coming of Rocks. I suppose it could also be the opposite, where Loki's character could be used to make it clear that Blackbeard and Xebec are fundamentally different, where he'd never follow someone like Teach. This flashback seems to imply that Xebec personally came to Elbaf in the past, and not just for a random visit, where he says that he was there for a reason. The obvious reason I can think of would be that he was there to study history, since Elbaf is basically a mother lode of lore on the One Piece world. If we go with the earlier idea, and if there actually is a connection between Xebec and Joy Boy, this Elbaf visit could also be related, where I think it's still a very good possibility that Joy Boy himself was a giant. What's also interesting is that Xebec may have already been Big Mom's captain at this point, which would have made him very unwelcomed by the giants. I think this also says something about Loki, where he seems to be one of the few giants who doesn't hate Big Mom. He not only didn't mind possibly being on the same crew as her, but we know that later in life, Loki even wanted to marry one of Big Mom's daughters. This chapter also literally mentions Big Mom herself yet again, with Goldberg saying that his dad once tried to take her out. Goldberg's still young for a giant, and in Big Mom's flashback, we saw that he was born the same year as Loki, so his dad could still be around in the present story. I'm personally guessing he's a giant we haven't yet seen, and that the story is setting up some legendary Elbaf warriors we'll meet later in the arc. According to the timeline, some of the giants actually managed to subdue Loki 6 years ago, so even though the country is currently full of pacifists, there may be some really strong warriors lurking about. If Goldberg's dad is someone we already know, the only real option to me is Kippa, since he fits the age range, and he would have had a reason to go after Lin, since she did kill his captain all those years ago. And yeah, this is what, the 11th time Big Mom has been mentioned in this arc. I know I keep repeating this in my videos, but it's just so obvious that she's coming back during Elbaf. One Piece pretty much always does this before a big character returns, where they keep being brought up in the story, like how Egghead had so many scenes revolving around Kuma, before he eventually showed up and became a central to the arc. So, just saying, if you think the Gods Knights are the ultimate villains of this arc, you might have to reconsider. For now though, the arc's clearly focused on the Knights, and this chapter once again ends on a scene focusing on Gunko. This is now starting to become a clear trend. Gunko is clearly not just a random henchman, but is someone getting focused chapter after chapter. This is really rare for new characters in One Piece, where the story is not just treating Gunko as an obstacle for the Straw Hats, but is fleshing her out and giving her character weight. It's honestly pretty cool that it's happening to a female villain too, where outside Big Mom, they're usually just an afterthought in the story. It's also really interesting that she's targeting Cologne. This shows that she's got real guts, where she's casually stepping up to face someone as strong as Jinbei. Shamrock said Gunko could have beaten Loki even if he wasn't chained, so this might be where we see if she lives up to the hype. If she actually overpowers Jinbei, that would be pretty nuts, since so far only top tiers like Akainu have managed to do that. Oh, and based on the last chapter, Gunko is a fan of Brook's music, so she's now literally standing in front of her idol, though something tells me she won't be asking for an autograph in the next chapter. There's also a good chance Kaban gets involved here. His son is currently being threatened, and he's already been shown to have strong observation haki, so he might have already sensed that he is in danger. I really don't know what to think if Gunko somehow manages to best Kaban, Jinbei and the rest of the Straw Hats here, since that would genuinely be a far more insane feat than what most of the elders pulled off in the last arc. And Gunko is just supposed to be a celestial dragon grunt. I genuinely think this will just be a hostage situation, but I'm personally hoping it doesn't last too long, because hostages being the solution to everything in One Piece is getting kind of exhausting. Zoro literally using armament haki hardening on an Elbaf dinosaur is pretty funny. I really don't know what the Straw Hats have against this island's wildlife where they have to go this hard, where Luffy for example opened the arc by going gear 5th against the snake. I think it's pretty clear that the monster trio is being deliberately kept out of the fight against the gods' knights, so the knights don't just get steamrolled. Another way to look at this is that now that Jinbei is part of the crew, he's now become the measuring stick for new enemies instead of Sanji. If this is true, it would break my heart, since I actually really like Jinbei. Loki seems to be genuinely honest about knowing where Shanks currently is, which I find kind of strange. Shanks himself said he only came to Elbaf as a pit stop in the last arc, and I don't know why he'd tell Loki of all people his plans. This is one of my personal delusions, where I'm convinced Shanks is currently heading to Pirate Island to fight Blackbeard. I've already done a whole video breaking this theory down, so if you haven't seen it, click here, and I'm pretty sure you'll also be convinced by the idea. Since the story is building up Loki's Shanks information so much, I could genuinely see it going something like this. Loki drops the bombshell that the Red Hair Pirates are going to fight Blackbeard, and this will be the time when we finally get our first look at events outside Elbaf in this arc, where we cut to Shanks just as the battle is about to start. One delusion I'm willing to let go of though, is Shamrock still being on Elbaf. I thought he'd stick around just a bit longer to finish the mission before heading back to the Holy Land, but it's now been 6 chapters since we last saw him, and no one's mentioned him since. So yeah, I think Elvis has left the building. I don't really have anything to say about this chapter's cover story, other than the fact that Yamato's side adventure is taking its sweet time. This is honestly kinda surprising, since Elbaf ended so fast, and we still don't know things like what happened to all the Wano-centric characters after the war, what was the fate of all of the Beast Pirates and Pero Sparrow, or even more minor stuff like what Apu did after the arc. I don't know, I guess he left Wano and went back to raiding the seas as a pirate. While on the topic of piracy, I think it's about time I raid your wallet. In case you didn't know, the viewers who make it to the end of my videos get plundered. And here are the names of all these poor people who've fallen victim to my channel. I am not without mercy, however. Even though your money gets plundered, you also get access to members only videos and other stuff by becoming a member. Sincerely though, thank you to all the current members for supporting the channel, and you too should consider joining if you're interested. Thanks a lot for watching this video to the end. I hope you enjoy your day.